So today I'm talking again to one of my conversation partners, Amit. And today we discuss a topic that might affect many people nowadays. We want to talk about the future and how to deal with it, how to prepare for it, and which attitude we should have. This is not an entirely new topic only related to COVID. Industry has changed tremendously in the past 20 years. The past when we used to have one place of work, one space of work, one company in which we worked, and we were pretty safe in this environment and could count on staying in this environment for some decades if we wanted to. That has dramatically changed. Globalization has a part in that. Countries and developing countries, people in developing countries dramatically increasing their effectivity, their efficiency, and their creativity has brought in so much competition on the world stage. Urbanization has grown so that family structures are not as they used to be. There's much more fluctuation, many more patchwork families. So there are so many factors that contribute and increase our insecurity and the capability of us to plan way ahead for many, many years ahead, that has dramatically shrunken. So that activates a part of our mind and our thinking that is challenging our capabilities to plan ahead. Not just the capability, we, in this more insecure environment, it seems like we are also forced to plan ahead. We have to make wise decisions again and again about financing, about which products to get, if we should buy some real estate somewhere and to invest in it. So there are many decisions and challenges ahead of us that are demanded from us that have to do with this topic of our ability to plan for the next years and how do we deal with possible disruptions. To make it a little bit more psychological, a common disruptor is and has been relationship and family satisfaction, where somewhere in the 40s, for many people, 30s, 40s, 50s, for many people, a great dissatisfaction with their life circumstances come in, the so-called midlife crisis, as it's coined, and where a very difficult decision has to be made. Should I get a divorce in spite of kids and in spite of real estate that we own together? So something that we set out to do in a relationship, planning ahead for the next decades, let's have kids. Usually people don't plan ahead to be divorced afterwards, after 5 years. So, and then comes a big kind of turnaround, be it in the relationship quality, be it in what I expect from life, but then a new decision has to be made. How should I prepare for that? What should be my attitude towards that? Should I stay put in my life circumstances, my job, my relationship, or should I create a major disruptor that I don't know how it will affect my life? And again, coming back to the present, we are faced with a big disruptor that nobody asked for, which is the COVID situation and its implications for health, for friends and family, and for the work environment. So now, even though people have prepared a lot, maybe set up a business that was viable, a restaurant or something, are faced now with circumstances that they cannot control, where they have to change, they have to adapt, or they have to close. So from these many perspectives, the bigger scale kind of developments in our societies, the psychological one and the very actual current one, we decided to look at the topic of how to perceive the future, immediate and long term, and what seems to be a good psychological pathway to plan ahead. Okay, after that somewhat lengthy introduction, welcome Amit. And why don't you give us a small introduction into your interest to this vast topic?
Sure. So I've been having multiple conversations with you, Doc, for the past 3+ years. I think it's a little bit over 3 years, maybe 4 years. I can't remember now. As you know, I like to plan. So both me and my partner, we like to plan our lives a little bit too we're a little bit too obsessed with planning it. So we plan our weeks, we plan our quarters, we plan our yearly goals, and then we look back and measure our weeks, quarters, and our yearly goals. Even our vacations are planned, to some extent, a little bit too much planned. So that's how we usually live our lives, minus COVID. And the reason we were discussing this today is, as you were talking about it, with COVID coming into the picture, and it doesn't have to be COVID, it could be, health issues too,
Hmm.
right? So in
Yes.
my case, I had a health issue which brought us running back from Europe, where we really enjoyed ourselves, to US for treatment and so on. Um, and as the COVID thing did happen, as you were mentioning about family divorce and partners, I do recall that in Jersey City, which is the city right across, I'm in Hoboken, so that's in Jersey City. um, this Indian couple, they recently opened right before COVID, I think in December, November, December, or Jan, they opened a restaurant. And we read this in the news that they found a body in Hudson River of some guy, and
Mm.
then they went to the house and they found the woman was pregnant and dead. So he probably
Mm.
killed.
Wow.
Um, and I guess because their business was not doing good, they probably pulled in a huge amount of loan to
Mm.
get the restaurant business started. So um, that's an extreme scenario, but a
Yeah.
lot of people are facing these difficult choices. My yoga instructor, for example, with the yoga studios closed, they don't have, they can't, they're doing it online, but it's not
Mm.
as profitable, and not too many people are joining. It's not the same, right?
Yes.
So people are running into a lot of these issues, um, and that's an extreme case. But yeah, people had planned it. I personally have also planned it, and ideally, if you look at it, people do keep saying, okay, you need to plan ahead, because you wouldn't fail once you have planned, but you would fail if you haven't planned. So
Yeah.
that's like a lot of marketing material that you hear or listen to. And then comes reality, and again, COVID is impacting everyone, so it is a big reality. But in smaller chunks of sets of people, it's health issue, it's death in the family,
Mm.
that also impacts reality. So that's where we wanted to talk about this topic, as to when reality does hit, what do you do about it in the whole planning situation?
Yes. Yes. And to a certain extent, we can count on it. Basically, those things happen that nobody will believe that. Okay, people have accidents, but nobody in my family will have accidents. Nobody in my family will have some tragic health issue or a mental issue and so on. It will happen at some point to our lives, right? And that's one aspect of why kind of growing older is difficult, because with time these things accumulate, right?
So right at that point, right? So I
Yeah.
wanted to get into it. Are you saying then that, I assume you're saying you should plan some planning, but are you saying when you're doing planning, a little bit more aggressive planning would be, let's say I give you my example of how I planned, right? So I wanted to say, all right, at the age of 70, what would I want to do, right? And I started by asking a lot of people questions, a lot of different age group, right? 70, 80, 60, 50. Um,
Mhm.
hey, what would you like to do? Or what did you miss out? What would you do if you had to do over again, right? And then I wanted to see what people wanted. So some people at the age of 70 or 80 said, you know what, I would want to be close to my kids, but I feel very lonely. I'm not close to them.
Mhm.
Uh, and they had certain things that they said they would want to change about their lives. So what I didn't want to do was get to the age of 60, 70, and then sit there and say, ah, crap, I should have done this differently.
Yes.
So I thought I would be the genius. I would plan out at 70 what I want to be like. Do I want to have kids, not have kids, not have grandkids? Where would I want to live? How
Yeah.
much money would I need? And then from 70, I went to 60, 60 to 50, 50 to 45 to 40, and say, okay, at each mark of the year, how do I want to do it? What kind of money do I want? How do I want to spread my investments? How do I want a second stream of income? And then we get into the year to year and say, year to year, how many places do I want to travel and how much budget would I accumulate to travel that, right?
Yes.
That's how a lot of people sell it too. A
Hmm.
lot of the planners, would want to say, okay, organize your life like that. Uh, because you can measure it too. So you won't feel at the end of the year that you wasted the year. You can look back and say, oh, wow, I did so many things and feel good about it for like 10 minutes
Yes.
or maybe. Um, Okay, so while you're doing this planning, are you saying you shouldn't plan like this? Or are you saying as you're planning this, you should also incorporate that, one of you may die in the family or your parents may have an issue,
Hmm.
or something like that would happen. So do you put it in the plan, in the planning, you put contingencies, or are you saying you don't put contingencies? Like how would you do it? Or would you say that this mechanism of planning from 70 all the way back to your age is a stupid thing to do to begin with?
Generally, planning is smart,
Okay.
but planning has also to be done in a smart way. You yourself, you work in the financial sector, and sometimes we talk about these things, right? And it definitely makes sense for you, and you recommend it to people to, when they invest, to have only the part that they're comfortable with in a high risk sector, right?
Hmm.
And other than that, to have a slow but sustainable grow uh, of the savings,
Right.
so they're on the safe side, and that they have something for rainy days. So financially, that makes sense, right? It's nothing new, and people know that we should have money for the rainy days because we don't know what happens. So that principle, I think, can well be uh, can be applied to the psychological field as well. How do we do that? There's no kind of clear script for that, but I plan ahead. I think that right now I enjoy reading and maybe I enjoy writing. I plan ahead to write my first novel in 4 years, let's say. Can I count on that? That I will still like the same thing in a couple of years? I can play with the idea, but I would say if you really want, if you have the desire to write a book now, don't count on having the same desire in a couple of years. Make it happen earlier because there is a lifespan for the needs and desires that we have, for the time that they're actual in our mind and for how much delay they can take. Uh, when we develop as children, that was one of the first principles of Freud when he discovered or made research with the unconscious, that children, when they are learning to come to grips with reality, pretty much from a very early time, they have to adopt the reality principle. Whereas the life and lust principle wants immediate satisfaction. I'm hungry now, so I'm crying until I get something. The older children get, we this is not acceptable anymore. We want them to have the ability to wait until lunchtime, until dinner, and so on. And then it extends. I want to have a lot of money now, right? Teenagers, I want to become a YouTube star or play online poker and become a millionaire.
Mhm.
And then it's the job of parents to say, yes, some people do that actually, but my job is to tell you it probably will take many years. And you need to learn and you need to become good at something. And then your skill set can be made use for making a lot of money. This is the way that is more reliable than just to have those fancy dreams. So there is a lifespan for our interests, and there is uh, also, while it's good to have a planning that is delaying our satisfaction, I would still make sure that this delay is in a reasonable amount of time. What does that mean in terms of your planning? I think that planning is smart. It depends on personality, how much planning needs to be done, wanted to be done. But I would not count that your plan of what to do with 70 will be the same in 5 years.
Got it.
So I would review these every now and then, even the long term planning.
Right. So to bring back, I agree with that 100%. Right. So one planning is to say, at 60, I want to buy a yacht and I want to, be fishing or something like that.
Yes.
Right. And then you roll around to 60 and you're like, you know what, this is something I really don't like.
Yeah.
Um, you thought that you would like it, but you don't. So I agree with that. I'm not. So what when I was looking at the plan, the way we were planning was that, let's say at 70, for example, or at 60, if I want to start a nonprofit organization in India or something, what I would do is at the age of 45 or 50, I would start making trips to India to see whether I even like the lifestyle over
Yes.
there. Or am I too used to living in US or maybe in Europe at some point? Similarly, I spent 2.5 years in Europe to see whether I even like Europe, whether I want to move to Europe at some point or not. And so as you're planning, yeah, I agree with you. You need to say, okay, instead of me creating this dream world of I want to be here at this age, I'm going to start experimenting to see if I would even like it there or not.
Yeah.
Right? I agree. That's fine. But what I'm saying is, what about contingencies, right? So COVID comes in, which is impacting everyone. So it's external. But
Yeah.
what if something happens within the family? Your parent passes away, or you end up having a medical issue which restrains you from doing something. How do you plan for that, or you don't plan for that? And if you don't plan for that, then at the time that these things happen, the planning goes to the wayside, and then these things happen. So now you're upset because you have a health issue, yet at the same time, you're also upset because you can't get to where you thought you would get to. So that
Yeah.
whole thing goes into the mix.
Yes.
So how does that work, or how would you recommend people work through that?
So, of course, I'm speaking more from the psychological perspective, and here the major principle is flexibility.
Okay.
I cannot plan for all eventualities, but I can practice the mindset and the skill set of flexibility in general.
So let's go over flexibility. So when you say flexibility, so what you're saying is, if I plan to be in a certain country, right?
Mhm.
Let's say, for someone, they may want to retire in Jerusalem or, India or wherever. So if you're practicing, or if your desire is to get to that state, now you've created a mindset to get there,
Yeah.
right? And now that's your laser focus. So that's your goal. That's what you think. That's what you enjoyed. You already tried a few trips. You tried to live there and said, yep, this is how I can see myself.
Yeah.
Uh, And then you can't get there. Or there is a period of 5 to 10 years where it's kind of like paused, or you're not sure where you are. So that brings you back into a scenario which you haven't planned for,
Mhm.
which you haven't practiced, yet you are in that scenario. So
Yeah.
now, how do people who like to plan you know deal with this? I'm talking about people who are obsessed with planning. How do they deal with a random scenario which they haven't thought of or imagined?
So the starting point for me is to do the planning from a place of this is what I want to do. It's not what I have to do. When I, whenever I slip into I have to, right? I have to stay married with that person in the next 30 years because otherwise I would lose everything. I have to be, I have to live in India in 5 years because there is no other place that I can imagine to live. Then I make myself very susceptible to disruption, right? So it's the wrong starting point. I would
So
start from a possibility of I want to be in India. That would be my preferred choice. Where else can I imagine myself to be?
yeah, but then that's not the same thing, right? So it's like saying I would want to be a millionaire, but maybe I won't be a millionaire. And, but that doesn't give you any motivation, right? You're like, all right, I'm fine to be a millionaire. I'm fine not to be a millionaire. It's okay. No big deal.
I don't mean it in that sense. I want to be somewhere. I want to be a millionaire, and it's important for me enough to work towards it. But if that does not happen, if I cannot make it happen, am I bound to be desperate and unhappy?
Yeah, you are. You are bound to be desperate and unhappy, right? Because what you're saying is, I want to get to a particular lifestyle. So you've already, when you say you want to get to a particular lifestyle, in
Mhm.
certain cases, people, majority, I wouldn't say majority, but some percentage of people, as I said, right, think that going fishing is going to be very relaxing, but they have never tried fishing,
Yeah.
right? So they don't know whether it's going to be relaxing or not. So let's keep that category on one side. The other category of people know that having a certain kind of lifestyle or certain kind of facilities, certain kind of money would add to their happiness, and they've played with it, and they know, yes, it has. I need this much to do that, right? So in their head, in people's head, they think they're setting realistic expectations. Now that they have created a goal, not a flexible goal, because they already have brought it down to realistic expectation, not like, having $20 million or something.
Yes. Yes.
Now you are passionate about it. So only when you're passionate about it would you work towards it with
That is
aggression,
fine. Yes.
right? But
So the
then now you're
passion is fine, the action is fine, but if I'm too married with my idea, I'm not saying that it will not happen. It might happen, but I set myself up for a major disruption because
and
things happen.
so you're saying have option A and option B.
Have yes, have options and have the. I'm more concerned with the mindset with which I approach the planning than to have kind of this scenario A, B, C, and Z, you know, in order to be fully prepared for eventualities. To have the mindset of, okay, I want to do this, I would really like to do this, but I'm well aware that the world uh, sometimes works in different ways. My parent gets disabled and I have to take care of them, or I lose everything for whatever reason, and then yes, I, unfortunately, I have to let go of this idea or to postpone it for a long time. But okay, I'm embracing the situation that I'm in, and I have to do what has to be done. Um, to give you another example, a person who was an obsessive planner was Orson Welles, the director of Citizen Kane. Maybe some people still remember.
Mhm.
Um, the interesting thing was that he, with some exceptions, actually with the exception of Citizen Kane, the movie, he could never fulfill his projects as he liked to. He was a difficult person. It was difficult to find money, or for him, so it never came to be. And he was asked then, why do you do this obsessive planning? Like you plan every detail. Why do you do it if you know that you probably will not have the money for it? And his answer was, I like to do the planning so that I'm prepared. When something changes, I know how to deal with every eventuality. So he came from a mindset of absolute flexibility. He counted in that things will be different as he planned. And then when the thing occurred, then he knew exactly what he needed to do because he had his scenarios and his plan B, C, and Z. Now, this is for the people who just find themselves to be obsessive planners. I think that this is something that we cannot fully control if we are a planning type or a not planning type. But even if I find myself to be a planning type, I can work more on being in a state of flexibility when I do these plans so that I'm not too, that my happiness does not depend on the world running as I wish it to be.
Mm. I think that's where I personally went wrong, because when I did plan, I did have different options, right?
Mhm.
Option one was, all right, if you stay in US, you can end up making more money versus if I move to Europe, I'll probably make less money and you know, I'll have a different plan. So I did that way, but what I did not do was I did not bake in the option of, all right, what if something goes wrong?
Mm.
That's what I did not bake in. So when there was a disruption in that plan, it was very hard to land myself back
Mhm.
feet, right? So, and that's when you get into that flux. And I think I don't know how many other people think through it or don't think through the disruption, but I get your point. So basically, what you're saying is, as you're planning, when you do plan, bake in the option of saying something could go wrong, right? So I may not get to this X dollar amount, or I may not get to this location where I thought I would get to.
Yes.
Um, and then what do I do? But then in that case, a lot many things can go wrong. So how do you then, so you can then plan to 70, right? Like, so let me take another example that you gave.
Yeah.
You're married to someone, you plan that at 70 you're going to be doing something, or let's say at 60 you'll be at some place, and then 10 years into your marriage you have to go through a divorce, or maybe your partner is no longer there, or something to that effect.
Hmm.
Yeah, then there are like variation of things that can happen, right? No one planned for COVID, right? No one planned for this lockdown. Everyone thought it would be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a month max, whatever. Now we are not looking to get out till June, July of next year.
Yeah,
So um, how do you then you can't then maybe the planning has to be done in a different way, because you can't think of all the eventualities,
right,
right?
right.
So how would you recommend people work this out then?
Yes. For the sake of simplicity, let me distinguish between a more psychological approach and a more spiritual approach.
Hmm.
The psychological approach has to be somewhat realistic. I mean, in 2018, to plan for a COVID event, only few people would have done that, and preppers, for example, right? And even then, we would have considered them, a bit wacky. It's like, why do you prepare for such an improbable event?
Hmm.
And we don't have to. And I think it's exaggerated to plan for any eventuality. In most cases, we don't have to do that. My job is, as a planner, from a psychological perspective, to be honest to myself with the needs that I have. That ties in with some other topics that we've had in the past and touched upon in other podcasts. So when I'm in a partnership, I'm baffled that people do that, but the relationship is not in a good state. It's not a great relationship, and people still decide to marry and to have kids. So this would violate that principle. I would say it's first important to make an honest assessment of what is my need right now. Is it good enough in order to plan ahead with that person? If I already don't like my job, maybe let's not plan with the income that I have for the next 2 years, because things might escalate. I might just have enough, or I get fired because my efficiency is not good enough. So I start from where I am,
Hmm.
right? If the relationship is bad, let me first work on the relationship so that then I can decide to marry that person and to have kids, and not just to build on the principle of hope, or because my friends tells me that she's so handsome or he's so nice, to go ahead and just do it and buy a house together. That for me is craziness. The same with a job. I can improve in the job, or I can find a better job. And then after 6 months passed and kind of the trial period is over and I get a fixed contract or whatever the circumstances are, then I can try to plan ahead with planning for with the income that I have, and to do some investments or make some purchases, whatever it is. So from a psychological perspective, this is the most important thing. And then to, as I said already, to periodically kind of reevaluate my long-term plans to see if I'm still at the same page. Is it the right time now to still plan ahead for a house, or have I changed in the past year, and flexibility and moving to other countries has become much more interesting to me, so that just keeping the idea of buying a house for the idea's sake doesn't make much sense anymore. So I do that, and I do it with a reasonable amount of scenarios. The more spiritual approach would be that I don't look at those individual decisions in planning and the individual scenarios, but I work on an attitude that is at any point in time able to accept the reality as it is, right? So psychologically, I do the planning, I do the scenarios, I take care of my needs, I work on my needs and to establish them in the future. And the more spiritually I approach these things, I'm fully aware that things can and will, to a certain extent, go wrong. And I, I basically work on accepting each new reality as it comes, without mourning, without feeling betrayed by people, by fate, by society, and relatively quickly, I mean, I'm simplifying and idealizing, but relatively quickly embrace the new reality and see, okay, what now, right? COVID comes, and then, okay, I might lose my business, my restaurant. What now? Of course, I can hide and cry and complain and all of these things and fall into a depression. But that would be exactly the opposite side of what the spiritual approach would be. A new reality sets in. I have not prepared for it, and I start fresh in my thinking. I look at the capabilities that I have, the resources that I have available, and ask myself, what can I do with my partner, with my family? What can we do? What assets do we have that we can get rid of? What new things do we want to try? Where can we go? And so on.
But that's a very, so the way you have walked us through, right? So I have two questions on that.
Please.
First, I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but the way you're explaining this, it doesn't seem like it's a good idea to plan for where you would be at 60 or 70.
Why not?
Uh, why not? Because there's so many eventualities and so many things that are in flux, which is life in general.
Yeah.
You can't plan.
Yes.
It's stupid to plan like that, right? Like, but
No,
do-
because it might be a need, right? And this is I'm not saying that it's generally good for people to plan for the age of 60. I don't, for example, but it's also not a deep-rooted plan need for me.
no, I get it.
If
But
my need
then,
is planning, then
uh
I should do the planning, not with the idea that this is what will happen or this is what I want to happen and so on, but because in order to satisfy the need of planning, and as you do, I think you have the need of planning, and to reverse engineer, the present more or less, or the next 6 months and the next year, according to the end of the project of when I'm 60. It makes sense for some people, and these people should do it. They should not just kind of be inflexibly married to this idea that I have right now to where I should be with 60. In 2, 3 years, I should look at it again. Where do I want to be with 60 now?
yeah, but what I'm trying to get to is a lot of people, if you do talk to some of the people who are 60, 70, 80,
Yes,
and you talk to some of them, they do have a lot of regrets. And
sure.
the regrets includes I didn't travel, should have spent more time with my kids.
Yes.
Um, I wanted to live in a different place. I didn't want to do what I did all my life,
Yeah.
right? So
Work
that,
less. Mm.
yeah, work less. So that is what triggered this entire planning thing for me, where I was like, you know what? I don't want to have regrets. If you do listen to the meditations, I forgot the name of the Buddhist person who does this meditation on death. I think you sent it to me. I
Yeah,
forgot her.
Ayakema.
Ayakema, yeah.
Mhm.
So when you do listen to Ayakema and then she's talking about death and she does talk about, okay, if you were to die and if you were to die imminently, what are the different things that you want to do? And then start
Yes,
doing those things.
yes.
And I want to start the topic of, if you were to die imminently, what are the things you want to do? Because in that sense, I wouldn't want to go work, right? That's the last thing I want to do.
Sure.
Uh, to go to work, but we can have a different topic on that one because that I'm very unsure of. But coming back to planning then, so that's when you plan your 80s, that's what you plan in your 60s, 70, and so on. But the thing is, there's so much changes that happen on a day to day. It doesn't seem like it makes sense to have a plan for how and when you want to retire because it is changing by the month, the year, the quarter. And
Mhm.
the only thing that you can actually have any control of is maybe perhaps planning the day or a day ahead, or maybe a month ahead, or maybe certain elements of your career. Um, Yet having this detachment, which is what you were talking about, that when things go completely crazy and out of your control,
Mhm.
having the detachment to say, okay, I'm going to step back. I know things are not the way I wanted them to be. Let me look at what assets I have. Let me look at what are the different things I can do to
Yes.
kind of fit into this situation. That's not very common. Not everyone. I mean, I don't know how many people can do that, but I don't know of anyone who can do that other than if you're a professional or some kind of a Buddhist monk or, some kind of a sage who
Mhm.
can detach themselves from that. So should we then learn to practice that detachment? Is that what it
Yeah,
is? Like,
I think it makes sense to do it, not with the idea to become, perfect in it. So whenever I have a big plan for a personal goal, to learn an instrument, to whatever, to meditate, to make money, whatever it is, of course I will be frustrated when there are circumstances that prohibit that. Of course it will. The question is the amount of time that I take for mourning and for complaining and dragging people around me down. That makes a substantial difference. If if I lose my work for whatever reason, I cannot, right now I'm working in Poland, and if for some reason I could not work here anymore,
Mhm.
right? It makes a major difference if I am down and feeling depressed for a week, for a month, or for 3 years. That's a major difference for me, and that's a major difference for the people around me who care for me.
So you're saying practice on minimizing the time you spend in a victim mentality, depression, anger, fear,
Yes.
and then jump back into action after that.
Yes,
Yes.
that makes sense. Now, that also is kind of, I have to invest time into that, right? It's reading, contemplating, meditating, or perceiving things differently in life. That also takes time. So here I have to balance, right? I cannot meditate for 20 hours a day.
Mhm.
But let me just keep this topic in mind and work towards more dispassion and mental flexibility. And it's something, it's, we can squarely say that the 80-20 rule applies also here. With relatively little, I can do relatively much. It's not about becoming, monastic or something like that. But if I apply a little bit of my energy to it, I will see the fruits in my daily life, because it's not just that big plans get frustrated, also small plans get frustrated. I want to eat that dish tomorrow, and I was looking forward towards it to go with my friend, and then my friend canceled, and it's like, shit. Now I cannot. You ruin my day, right? These things happen all the time, and to see, kind of, to apply this to see how useful it is to be able to move on, right, and not to be stuck in the dissatisfaction and the frustration of it, will come handy not only in those big plans, but also in daily life. And that, again, I repeat, I don't think that this is too much of time or mental investment. It's a subtle switch, and that can bring about already a noticeable improvement of life quality.
But then what you're saying is you need to be aware of it at all times, right? Because you don't,
Not all
when,
times, many
yeah,
times. Yeah.
most times. Because when your friend cancels or when my coffee in the morning is not warm enough to my
Yeah.
taste, it does ruin my day because now I'm like crap, I have
Yes.
to drink this lukewarm coffee.
Yes.
But then you have to be aware at that time to say, that's okay, I'll have tomorrow to have a better coffee, or I can go get a new coffee or
Yep.
something. Yes, so that makes sense. But for you to have that, you need to have some level of awareness because it
Yes.
won't come naturally. You have to be
Yep.
aware of it at that time. Um, and that's
Totally
something that
agree.
I think you get from practice, right?
Yes, this is what
So,
we get from practice. This needs awareness, and this is going against the grain. What is natural is the frustration, and with time, um, there's this, what is it called, the dirt bug, the dirt beetle, uh, that rolls kind of the growing ball of shit, of feces, and becomes bigger and bigger with time. This is, in a way, if we don't intervene in our life, this is what happens. Our mental apparatus becomes older, with more experience, with more accumulated pain and frustration um, and dissatisfaction. And unfortunately, our mental apparatus is wired in a way that it remembers these things very well, and they accumulate. They have a tendency to accumulate. So this is what happens if we go just with the flow of how our mind is built. It will become more and more difficult and more heavy. So I think it's wise to start implementing at some point a little bit of mental detox of some sort, so that we can ensure to stay mentally flexible, so that we're not too wrapped up in these past accumulated dissatisfactions. And one aspect of this is the flexibility of embracing reality as it comes to us, again, in a reasonable amount, as it appears to us. We don't have to meditate all the time, but just to be aware of this principle, as you say, the awareness will bring its fruits.
Got it. So, and again, I don't want to, I know we discussed this, so I want to bring this back. So let's say there are two sides of looking at it. If you look at it in a very black and white way,
Hmm.
then one can say that, look, you want to get to a certain goal in your company, you want to make it to a C-level position or something,
Yes.
right? Um, but then you're open to being flexible in case you don't get to it, right? And when you have an option B, you are a little bit more relaxed about it.
Yes.
And then one can say that you're not trying your best, you're not, because if I can't get to it, you're like, whatever, right, I'm fine where I am, or whatever that is.
Yes.
So isn't that looked at being less aggressive? Look, like, isn't that the bad thing? Because then you are okay with the way things are, you're not actually pushing hard, like you're falling down trying to get back through it, falling down, get back through it.
Yeah, here the goal is not important for me. My important point is here, am I okay with being happy?
Am I okay with being, so you're bringing this back to happiness. Am
Yes.
I happy with what I have?
Yes. Yes.
Even if I don't get what I want, am I so, but that's,
Well,
this
well,
is
not
right.
not not entirely. To bring
Okay.
it back to your point, so I want to become an executive in my company, right?
Mhm.
And then one day I wake up and think like, what the hell? It doesn't make sense. Maybe I want to become a sailor, right? Okay, so your question is then, well, should I drop everything now because of this? No, what I do now is to make a reasonable assessment where I am enough in tune with myself to understand, has at night a major shift happened in my unconscious, so that it's not just a fluke, it's not just today, and it's not just a week where I'm down, but has a seismic shift happened that I really don't want it anymore? Or is that a daily thing?
No, but
So
that's a shift, that's a desire shift,
yes.
right? So desire shift is easy. Desire shift,
Okay.
in my view, desire shift is easy, right? So, for example, I have a shift in desire for some weird reason. I'm happy because now I'll be happy because I have a shift in desire. I don't want to be an executive. I want to be a sailor in your example.
Yes, and then you start working towards that.
You
If
start working towards
if
that.
that's a
That's a
yes.
good. I'm talking about the other scenario, which is not in our control, right? And I think usually people, although if you read the books for Stoic and everything, it says, if it's not in your control, you shouldn't be upset about it because it was never in your control, right? So deal
Mhm.
with what you have to deal with. I'm not too sure of that because, things which are not in your control are the ones which get you a little bit upset because now,
Yes.
you want to get to something, and something which is not in your control has impeded that ability of you to get somewhere.
Yeah.
You
Let's say
are,
a merger, right? In your company, you were promised a position, and then your company's bought, and then
or they lay you off for whatever reason, they don't like the way you're being aggressive, so
yes.
now you have to start all over again. So, and these things are not in your control. People's perception of you to a certain extent are in your control, but not to the
Mhm.
entire. um, yeah, so now what do you do? So let's work through this scenario.
Right. The question is, can I imagine a life without that, or is
Question,
my
desire,
satisfaction in life depend on that?
yeah, so your desire hasn't changed from being an executive to a sailor. That's, in my view, and maybe to some people that may be confusing, but in my view, that's a simple thing to work
Uh-huh.
with because I'll be happy. I'll be happy pursuing a different path.
Yes.
Your desire remains the same. External factors come in and screw you over. Now,
Right.
what do you do?
Okay. The question is, what is the reality right now? Is there a path for me to satisfy the still active desire to become an executive?
So let's go through this. So the path would be, first you'll be angry, then you'll be sad, then you'll probably accept it. And then you have to reevaluate and say, all right, do I really want to go through all the hustle to
Yeah.
get there again or not?
Right. Maybe there's more hustle now, maybe there's less. If it's less, then it's a no-brainer, but maybe there's more. And now I reassess my need. It comes back to that. So the need is the same, but there was a calculation in the beginning. I had a trajectory. I thought like, okay, if I play this well, in 5 years I will be an executive. My desire responded with, okay, I can live with this delay. Right now, as it looks like, the trajectory is more work in 5 years or same work, amount of work in 7 or 8 years. And now I have to, it's very simple. I have to reassess. Does my inside, does my system still resonate with this calculation? Or does it say, no, you know what, in 7 years, I'm personally, I would be more than 50 years old. That's too long for me. Same calculation with more work in 5 years. So yes, I can work my butt off in the same amount of time in 5 years that I planned, I could make it. Do I want that? No, I'm not in this period of my life anymore. So the honest assessment here is at the center of everything. And then my question is, good, if this is not what I want to do under the current circumstances, what do I do now?
No, wait, but before you get to the next step,
Yeah.
so you assessed, right? So let's walk through your assessment.
Yes.
Maybe, so let's go through the no-brainer is it's an easy path and you pursue it. That's fine.
Yeah.
The actual issue that can happen is, all right, it's going to be another 5, 6 years for you to rebuild the, your skill set and everything to
Mhm.
get to the in a new company to get to the executive level.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, in 6 years I may be beyond 50. Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to put the amount of effort? I'm tired as it is.
Mhm.
We're like, yeah, maybe not. Now, when that maybe not comes, with that maybe not also comes is I failed. Or are you saying that I failed does not come with that? In my view, I failed comes right in the center that, okay, I wanted to get,
Yes.
I couldn't, I failed. So do you
Yes.
accept the failure or are you saying don't look at it as a failure?
Well, again, it's let's assess the reality, right? I thought I was cooler than that, but I realized, shit, this is a major blow.
Right,
Let's take it as this probably a realistic case.
right.
So now I have to figure out what do I do next with my dissatisfaction.
What do I do next with my, yes. Now I have to figure out what do I do next with my
Do I
dissatisfaction.
invest it in work? Do I use this anger and frustration to position myself even better than before?
Mhm.
Is what I want to do? Or is that the point where I'm starting to divorce from my company? It's like, no, this I I could put a lot of work into coaching and therapy in order to get over it, but better to create a new clean slate. Better to start at another company because I don't want to see the same faces at the company that pass by me faster than I am. I don't want to deal with this frustration. So I assess also my frustration realistically.
No, but then what I was asking was,
Yeah.
would you even consider looking at it as a failure? Or are you saying don't consider looking at it as a failure?
Do I have a choice?
No, you
No, I
have to
don't have
look
a
at it as
choice.
a failure.
Yes. So if I find myself seeing it as a failure,
Mhm.
have to make the next decision. Do I want to work on it or not?
So first you're saying accept that you failed.
What else can I do? Deny it? I can work on it. I'm not saying that it's inevitable, right? But it might need a lot of conversations and digging a little bit deeper into uh, my set of motivations and into my mind. Why did I depend so much on this outcome, on this planning, and so this is the kind of the coaching or psychological or counseling work that I can do with myself or with a professional or with books or with a coach or whatever. I can work on seeing it as a failure, but the immediate thing is there. The perception, I failed, this sucks, this is there, this is a reality.
Okay, so you're saying then you have to sit with it or work through it. So you have to work with a professional, books, coach, life coach, whatever that is, and go through. First is that grief that you have failed. So you have to go through
Yes.
that period of grief.
Yes.
Then you need to realize why you wanted to be an executive to begin with, right? Is it just
Can
because
be.
you,
I'm not saying that everyone has to do that. That can be a path. There might be people who say, no, the right thing for me is to move on. I
okay, so
don't want
some
to
people
deal with
not
this. I
see
don't want
it
to
as
learn
a
from that.
failure.
I want to do something else.
Yeah, so they may be like, you know what, screw it. I don't think it's worth it and move on. Or
Yeah.
some people may be stuck with it and saying, they're self-judging or they're very hard on themselves and they're like, darn it, I failed.
Yes. If you
Why?
ask me now, from my opinion, I think the healthiest thing is to gain flexibility towards that. The right answer will not lie in the alternatives. Do I stay in the company or not, or do I perceive the same goal or not? I think the smartest thing to do psychologically is to ask myself, is that okay for me? Do I want to be that tense about these topics? And some people would come to the conclusion, yes, it's fine. This is how I drive myself. This is how I push myself. I don't want to become, you know,
Complete.
calm and full of equanimity. And that's not me. I don't want that. I don't even want to have that. I want
Mhm.
an energetic, passionate life with satisfaction and dissatisfaction. I want that roller coaster life. And for them, it's fine not to kind of change the mechanic of it, right? But when someone says or comes to the realization, this is hurting me. I don't want this. I feel trapped in my ways of thinking. I come back to this thought of failing, and it doesn't energize me. It doesn't fuel me to become better. The opposite. It takes away from me. I don't want this. And then, as a result, I would say, then go ahead and go in that direction and do it properly, deconstruct it, learn from it, reframe it, do the whole coaching psychological shebang. Do it with yourself, with books, or with people, but pursue that so that it doesn't bother you anymore.
Excellent. So, okay. So now coming back to the whole goals and planning and everything, right?
Yes.
So I think this was really, really helpful. So what you're saying is, as you're planning your goals, right? So as you plan it out, when you talked about flexibility, the flexibility should come more around if things don't go the way you wanted them to go, how easy would it be for you to adapt, and how passionate are you about something,
Mm-hmm.
and how much would it hurt you if you can pursue that passion, and how many things can change between now to 5 years from now, and have you accounted for that, or have you given yourself some leg room to work with that?
Yes, so that would be the bigger question. What I would only add is observe yourself in the present so that you learn how who you are and how you react. So I can plan for the next in 5 years to reach a certain goal, right? I can entertain a little bit the thought of, would I be majorly disappointed if it wouldn't come about, right? I can ask myself this question, but I can fool myself, I can trick myself. I get a pretty good, or I get a better indication if I observe my small disappointments that I get today. The interruption with the plans for the weekend and for the vacation and for the lunch and for the party and
So
all of
start
this.
small.
I can learn
Start
about
to
this.
play with small things and try to see
Yes.
if you can adapt to the small things.
Yes.
That'll prepare you to adapt to the bigger ones, like death in the family or your partner leaving you or things like that.
Right. Or I might come to the realization when I observe those small things like, oh shit, I'm not dealing well with disruptions. So I have to prepare for this big thing that is so important to me. I really have to plan this well and to plan a lot of contingencies because I'm not good at failing. I'm not good at being frustrated. That might be an outcome of such an observation on the small scale.
But is that why, coming back to Aikima, and I don't know how long it has been, I don't know if you have to end it, because I
Yeah,
think
we
we're
should wrap it up quickly.
okay.
Soonish.
So
Yes.
we can talk about Aikima and some other one.
Yes.
But the only thing I wanted to say was, when she was talking about it and she was talking about fear of death, the biggest fear, well, when the way she was perceived, thinking about it, was the biggest fear is that as you are coming close to death, and as death is becoming imminent, you are afraid that you didn't do what you thought you would have done with your life.
Yes.
And that's when, in my view, when I listened to it, I was like, oh crap, yeah, let me start planning it. So at least I know what I want to do and I'm pursuing what I want to pursue.
Yeah.
So I got mixed up in that whole situation where I ended up making it very, I was being very passionate about certain goals, and I did not plan for any kind of contingencies within it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where I personally went wrong. And I don't know how many other of your listeners, if they have a similar passion or they have a different passion, or if they plan it differently. I don't know how they plan it, but that's where I think I went a little bit off course.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there might be. And that's again, it's a question of style. My suggestion would be just to be circumspect about it. So there are certain goals that I don't want to plan differently. I don't want to have a contingency. I want it to happen. But then to be smart enough to think, okay, So I don't plan for a plan. I don't plan for it not to come about, right? Do I take responsibility for the consequences?
You have to, right?
Well, that if that is a choice, then it's fine. Then I can remember it when it happens. Then it's like, okay, I bet everything on this one horse, and it didn't happen. My bad. But this was my decision, and kind of mentally, the to speak a little bit psychologically, the unconsciousness was also more prepared for it, and will be more supportive than if it was just kind of silly and blind about it. When I thought with magical thinking, okay, if I just want it enough, I will make it happen, and I
Mhm.
don't take responsibility for the failure in the sense that it wouldn't happen, then I'm completely unprepared, and then my worldview collapses because everything was attached to that. It's like, what is this world that I'm living in? What happened to my magical thinking? What about God and all of these things? So that for me is an unwarranted blindness.
True. Okay, I'll stop asking more questions, but I think it's good. I hope people find it useful, or your listeners do. Anything else you wanted to add, Doc, before we close it out?
Well, just the reminder that it's easy to talk about these things. I hope that we could discuss it with a little bit of clarity, at least. It doesn't make the situation easier. It's not saying that it's a simple thing to adjust to the loss of job, the loss of people. Of course, all of that hurts, and I the clarity that I wanted to bring into that was not meant as minimizing the difficulties and the pain that are connected with that.
And a quick minute on what should people do who are facing some tough times with the whole COVID situation? Like, how should they deal with their immediate disappointments?
Well, you hinted at it a little bit already. We go through this the phases of mourning, right?
Hmm.
So there is the anger and there is the sadness, and to a certain extent, we have to go through these. And probably conversations are good, honest conversations with our partners, with the people close to us, close friends, and they might help us to process and to come not intellectually, but more for deeper inside, for our unconscious, to an acceptance of the situation as it is, uh, and the willingness and the readiness to move on, after an appropriate period of mourning.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Doc. You have a good day then.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.